Brandon Cole pulled into the sunlit lot of Prime Autohaus, his newly purchased luxury dealership nestled in the heart of San Marlin, a fast-growing city known for its wealth and status. But today, Brandon wasn't arriving as the CEO. He drove a modest, slightly dusty SUV and parked it discreetly in a visitor's spot toward the back of the building. His attire, faded jeans, a plain grey hoodie, and worn sneakers was deliberately unassuming, with the hood of his sweatshirt pulled just slightly over his brow and no entourage or fanfare. Brandon looked nothing like a man worth millions. That was precisely the point. He wasn't there for headlines or handshakes. He was there to watch, to listen, and most importantly, to learn. He wanted to know how people were treated when they had no title, no status, and nothing to prove. The showroom doors glided open, releasing a whoosh of cool, leather-scented air that wrapped around him as he stepped inside. Prime Autohaus glistened with polished chrome glass accents and flawless floor tiles reflecting beams of midday sunlight. Expensive sedans, exotic coupes, and limited-edition SUVs stood proudly under crystal chandeliers, each one priced well into six figures. At first, Brandon went unnoticed. A group of employees leaned casually at the front desk, laughing softly among themselves. Their chatter faded as they caught sight of him. Glances exchanged quickly, eyes narrowing in silent judgment. His hoodie and shoes did most of the talking, it seemed. A few murmurs circled the air, barely audible but pointed. He walked slowly, purposefully, pausing near a sleek charcoal-grey convertible, studying the detail work on the grille with genuine admiration. But he wasn't alone for long. From across the gleaming tile floor came the rhythmic click of polished heels. Heather, a well-dressed woman in her late 40s with sharp eyes and a clipboard tucked confidently beneath one arm, approached with a brisk stride. Her blazer was tailored to perfection, and every part of her projected control and efficiency. Her greeting was curt but polite. "Can I help you with something?" she asked, her voice clipped and businesslike. Brandon turned to her with a relaxed smile. "Just browsing," he said casually, his hands tucked into his hoodie pocket. Her eyes scanned him from head to toe, lingering slightly too long on his shoes. "These vehicles start at six figures," she noted, her tone already shifting from welcome to wary. "Most require pre-qualification before a test drive." The message, though not directly spoken, was loud and clear. "You don't look like you belong here." Brandon remained composed. He simply nodded and turned to another vehicle. "Nice design," he said, gesturing toward a pearl-white coupe. Heather's lips tightened. "That one's reserved for clients with certified financing," she replied, taking a small step closer. "If you're just here to look, I'd recommend you check out our pre-owned selection. More accessible options." Brandon's gaze stayed on the car. He wasn't offended. He was intrigued. It wasn't the first time someone had sized him up, based solely on appearance, but it never ceased to be revealing. This visit was already proving useful. He nodded again calmly. "What would you recommend for someone like me?" He asked, his tone neutral. Heather hesitated just a beat before responding with a tight smile. "I can print out a list of used models that might be a better fit." As Heather walked away to retrieve the list, Brandon took a slow lap around the showroom, noting how a few other employees watched him cautiously from a distance. Their body language was subtle but telling: arms, crossed posture, stiff attention, half-hearted. No one offered assistance. No one made eye contact longer than a second. For a place that marketed itself as a premier luxury experience, the warmth was sorely lacking. By the time Heather returned with a printed list of pre-owned cars, each with modest price tags and budget-conscious specs, Brandon had already formed a quiet, powerful impression. He thanked her politely, folded the paper, and slipped it into his hoodie pocket. He wasn't angry, he wasn't surprised, but he was ready. This visit had revealed more in 10 minutes than any performance review ever could. Heather had done exactly what he'd feared, judged a customer, not by their intent, their questions, or their attitude, but by their clothes and their car. And if this was how Prime Autohaus operated under the surface, Brandon knew there was work to do. He took one final look around the showroom and smiled, not out of satisfaction, but anticipation. The next chapter at Prime Autohaus would begin soon, but not before a few hard truths were laid on the table. Heather stood with perfect posture, her clipboard cradled against her side like a badge of authority. Mr. Cole, she began using his name with a forced sense of politeness. I truly don't want to waste your time. Prime Autohaus is a boutique dealership. We specialize in a very refined clientele. Brandon's eyes held hers steadily, his expression unreadable. She continued, unaware that every word was deepening her misstep. We've had people walk in before thinking this was a rental showroom or a tourist photo stop. You'd be surprised, she added, with a dry chuckle, almost waiting for Brandon to share the laugh. He didn't. Instead, he just nodded, slowly, letting her dig deeper. If you're looking for something more budget-friendly, she said, pausing for emphasis, there's a pre-owned dealership just down the road. They offer solid financing options, and walk-ins are usually welcome. Brandon remained still, letting the tension fill the space between them. You really think I'm not your target customer? Huh? He asked, not accusing, just curious. Heather's smile tightened. I'm just trying to be honest with you, she said flatly. There's no shame in knowing your limits. The way she said it, measured, polite, almost clinical, carried the weight of a judgment she didn't even attempt to hide. Brandon's body language never shifted, calm, relaxed, but undeniably focused. All right, he said slowly. In that case, maybe you can help me set up a meeting with the owner. Heather blinked, genuinely surprised. The owner, she echoed. They don't just meet with everyone who walks in. The owner's a very busy person. They handle high-level strategy, not drop-ins off the street. Brandon raised an eyebrow as if pondering that idea for the first time. Busy, huh? He said I'd still like to speak with them if possible. Heather's composure started to slip. Her professional mask thinned. Look, sir, she said with a tone that made the word sir sound like an insult. We're doing our best to serve all customers. But this is getting a bit out of hand. Unless you're serious about making a purchase today, I need to ask you to stop distracting my team. Her words, while measured, were laced with exasperation. To her, Brandon wasn't a guest. He was a problem. A man in the wrong place, asking too many questions, pushing too many buttons, and with that, she turned away, slightly clearly, expecting him to leave on his own. But Brandon didn't move. Instead, he reached calmly into his hoodie pocket and pulled out his phone. No problem, he said with a quiet confidence. I'll just make the call myself. Heather hesitated, thrown off by the shift in tone. Excuse me, she asked, the clipboard in her hands, suddenly feeling heavier. I said, I'll make the call. Brandon repeated already, scrolling through his contacts. Don't worry. I know how to reach the owner. He lifted the phone to his ear, took a step away toward the corner of the showroom, and spoke in a low voice. Hey, Derek. Yeah, it's Brandon. I'm at Prime Autohaus right now. Everything's good, just a bit of a misunderstanding. Could you stop by for a few minutes? Then he ended the call, slipping the phone back into his pocket as casually as he had taken it out. Heather watched, frozen in place, unsure whether she'd just witnessed a bluff or something far more real. Around the showroom, a few employees had begun to notice the shift in atmosphere. Conversations at the desk grew quiet, and eyes started drifting toward Brandon and Heather. Something had changed. The energy, the control, the assumption of who held the power. Brandon looked at Heather again this time, with a calm smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. They'll be here shortly, he said simply. She opened her mouth to reply, but found no words ready. Her breath caught for a moment, caught between confusion and a growing, gnawing suspicion that she had made a mistake far larger than she realized. For the next several minutes, Brandon waited by one of the SUV's, hands tucked casually in his pockets, admiring the vehicle's chrome details and glossy black finish. He wasn't fidgeting. He wasn't agitated. He was simply waiting, but the room around him had gone still. Heather tried to mask her discomfort, returning to her post behind the front desk, but her posture was no longer relaxed. She fumbled slightly with the clipboard, pretending to read the same page twice. Employees whispered in hushed tones, their eyes darting between the man in the hoodie and their increasingly unsettled manager. And though no one knew exactly what was happening, they all felt the same thing in their gut. Something was about to change, and not in the way anyone expected. The quiet tension inside Prime Autohaus was suddenly broken by the sharp, rhythmic click of leather shoes on polished tile. The front door opened with a soft chime, and in walked a sharply dressed man in a navy suit, his tie perfectly knotted and an air of quiet authority surrounding him. Derek Miller, the regional director for Prime. Autohaus was not the kind of man who made casual visits. His presence alone shifted the mood of the entire showroom. His eyes immediately scanned the space and landed on Brandon. A genuine smile stretched across his face as he strode over, extending a firm hand. Mr. Cole Derrick said warmly, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear, "Good to see you, sir. Didn't expect you today." Brandon shook his hand firmly, offering a small, knowing smile. "Appreciate you coming on such short notice," he replied calmly. The room went silent. The front desk staff froze mid-motion. A young salesperson who had been pretending not to watch dropped his pen. But the most shocked face of all belonged to Heather. Her clipboard nearly slipped from her grip as her eyes darted from Brandon to Derek and back again. "Mr. Cole," she echoed, her voice cracking slightly. Her confident exterior crumbled in an instant, replaced with a pale flush of confusion and embarrassment. Derek turned to her, his tone now far more professional. "I see you've already met the new owner of this dealership." Heather's lips parted, but no words came out. Her breath caught in her throat as she realized the full weight of her mistake. Everything about her behavior in the past 30 minutes, every dismissive glance, every assumption she had made, now stood glaring under the spotlight of truth. The other employees, piecing together what had just unfolded, wore a mix of astonishment and discomfort on their faces. Brandon glanced around the room, taking in the shift in energy. He didn't gloat, he didn't smirk, he simply looked thoughtful, calm, in control. Then he turned to Derek with a quiet firmness. "Let's bring everyone together," he said. "It's time we had a conversation." Within minutes, the staff had been gathered into the dealership's glass-walled conference room. The air was thick with anticipation and awkwardness. The sleek furniture usually meant to impress clients now felt cold and clinical. Brandon stood at the head of the table, arms relaxed at his sides, but his presence was commanding. Derek remained near the door, arms crossed, silently observing the room. The employees sat in uneasy silence, casting quick glances at each other and at Heather, who had taken a seat in the back corner, her posture rigid and her face unreadable. Brandon allowed the quiet to stretch for a few moments before he began. "Thank you all for joining on such short notice," he said, his voice steady but carrying undeniable weight. "For those of you who don't know me yet, my name is Brandon Cole, and I'm the new owner of Prime Autohaus." A few heads turned quickly, some nodded in recognition. Others looked away, clearly uncomfortable. "I came in today dressed casually," Brandon continued, "because I wanted to see how this dealership treats people when there's no title, no announcement, no camera crew. Just a man walking through the front door to look at a car." His gaze swept across the room. "What I experienced today was eye-opening, not because I was offended, but because I was reminded of how powerful first impressions can be." He turned briefly toward Heather, not to shame her, but to anchor his point. "No one here knew who I was, and that's okay, but the way I was treated based on appearance before I said a word, before I asked a question, that's something we need to talk about." He paused, letting the silence fill in the blanks. "This isn't just about one interaction. It's about culture. It's about what we've allowed to define how we treat people. We say we're a luxury dealership, but luxury should never be an excuse to judge someone before understanding them." He stepped back slightly from the table. "And that's why this meeting isn't a reprimand, it's an opportunity for all of us." The staff listened in silence, some nodding. Slowly, others shifting in their chairs, Heather stared down at her folded hands, her mind racing through the moment she had brushed Brandon off, unaware of the consequences it would carry. Yet Brandon's tone remained calm, free from vengeance or bitterness. He wasn't there to embarrass anyone, he was there to lead. And as he stood before them, composed and thoughtful, it became clear to everyone that this wasn't just about a hidden identity or a dramatic reveal. This was a turning point, a chance to reset the values of Prime Autohaus from the inside out. And Brandon was ready to do it with fairness, purpose, and an unwavering belief that respect should never depend on appearance. The conference room at Prime Autohaus was designed to impress glass walls, brushed metal finishes, and a long, dark walnut table stretching down the center. But today the room felt less like a boardroom and more like a mirror, reflecting everything the dealership stood for, both good and flawed. Brandon Cole stood at the head of the table, composed but resolute. The employees sat in a quiet semicircle with some glancing nervously at each other, while others looked intently at Brandon, sensing this wasn't going to be an ordinary staff meeting. Derek stood near the door, his usual air of authority, now giving full stage to the man at the center, with the weight of the morning still hanging over the room. Brandon took a breath, then began. "I want to start by telling you who I am." Brandon said, his voice firm, but not raised. "I'm not just the man who signs your paychecks. I'm someone who built his life and career from the ground up. And I've walked into a lot of rooms like this one, not dressed in suits, not with a business card, but just as a person, a customer, a learner. Someone willing to be seen for who I am, not what I wear." He let his eyes move slowly across the room, locking briefly with each person. "And today," he continued, "I walked into this dealership hoping I would be treated with respect, not because of who I am, but because that's what every customer deserves." The silence in the room was heavy, but no one dared interrupt. Instead, Brandon continued. "I was sized up, dismissed, and redirected based solely on how I looked. I didn't raise my voice, I didn't flash my credentials, I just let it happen, because I needed to know if the culture we're building here is one worth keeping." He paused and looked directly at Heather, who sat 2 seats from the end, her posture rigid, her hands clenched together in her lap. "This is not just about one person," he added, "but it is a reflection of something bigger, and if we don't address it now, it will define us." He walked slowly around the table as he spoke, making his presence felt in every corner of the room. Culture is more than mission statements. It's the choices we make in small moments, the glances, the tone of voice, the assumptions we carry without even thinking. And if we claim to be a luxury dealership, then the real luxury must be how we make people feel. Professionalism, inclusion, empathy. Those are the standards, not who wears the most expensive shoes. A few employees shifted in their seats, the message clearly striking home. "We can't sell 6-figure cars while offering 6-cent dignity," he said simply. "And that starts with each of us choosing to show up better." Heather, who had been silent the entire time, finally raised her hand, her voice quiet and uncertain. "Mr. Cole, may I say something?" Brandon stopped and nodded. She stood slowly, eyes cast downward. "I was wrong," she said, her voice wavering slightly. "I judged you unfairly. I assumed things I shouldn't have, and I'm deeply sorry for how I treated you, and for what that says about my leadership here." The room was silent, all eyes now on her. Brandon studied her for a moment, then gave a small nod. "Thank you, Heather," he replied gently. "It takes courage to admit that, and I appreciate your honesty." But then his tone shifted slightly, still calm but firmer. "That apology matters, but what matters more is what happens next." He returned to the front of the room and placed both hands lightly on the table. "Moving forward, we're going to be implementing changes, real ones, training, accountability systems, and a renewed focus on customer experience that puts respect at the center of everything we do." He let the weight of that promise settle. "This isn't about punishment, it's about improvement. I believe in second chances, but only when they're earned through action, not just words." The employees, still quiet, began to nod. Some slowly, others with visible relief. For the first time that day, the mood began to shift. There was discomfort, yes, but also clarity. A line had been drawn, and a new standard was being set. And from the way Brandon stood there, firm, thoughtful, and unshaken, it was clear that this was just the beginning. The following week at Prime Autohaus marked the beginning of a quiet but profound transformation. The polished floors, luxury sedans, and glass display walls hadn't changed, but something beneath the surface had. Brandon Cole, now no longer a mystery, but firmly established as the dealership's new owner, introduced a series of internal changes that would reset the cultural foundation of the business. In a company-wide email, followed by small group meetings, Brandon laid out a new vision for Prime Autohaus, one centered not just on profitability, but on professionalism, inclusivity, and above all, respect. New training modules were rolled out focused on unconscious bias, customer empathy, and proactive communication. Each team member, from reception to sales, would undergo these sessions not as a punishment, but as a commitment to growth. In those meetings, Brandon wasn't just the CEO, he was a facilitator, a listener. He invited stories from his staff, asked them what respect meant to them, and challenged them to think beyond appearances. He shared stories of his own past, of times when he too had been overlooked or dismissed. His message was clear: no customer should ever feel like they don't belong, and no employee should carry assumptions that keep them from offering their best. These conversations weren't easy at first. Some employees resisted, others were uncertain. But over time, something began to shift. People started holding doors open longer, listening more intently, and welcoming visitors with a bit more care in their tone. The luxury cars remained the same, but the service experience slowly began to feel different, warmer, more human. A few days later, Brandon arrived unannounced again, dressed simply, though this time without the disguise he wanted to observe, not as a test, but as a witness to the changes underway. Near the front of the showroom, he noticed Heather speaking with a young woman in her mid-20s. The customer wore a graphic T-jeans and carried a portfolio of sketches under one arm. She was by traditional standards not the typical Prime Autohaus shopper, but Heather didn't flinch. She greeted her warmly, asked questions about her design work, and offered a bottle of water while they talked. When the young woman hesitated to sit in one of the luxury coupes, Heather encouraged her. "Take your time," she said, with a sincere smile. "You belong here as much as anyone else." Brandon watched the interaction from a distance, arms crossed, a quiet sense of pride swelling in his chest. It wasn't just that Heather was following protocol. She meant it. Her body language, her tone, her patience, it was all genuine. There was no trace of the clipped voice or subtle disdain she had shown the week before. Something in her had changed, not out of fear, but understanding, and that more than any policy or training session was the true beginning of the dealership's transformation. Brandon didn't interrupt. He simply turned and walked through the showroom, nodding at a few employees along the way, each of whom now greeted him with genuine recognition and respect. Later that day, Brandon convened with Derek in his new office. The sun poured in through the floor-to-ceiling windows, reflecting off a model car collection behind his desk. "It's happening," Brandon said softly. "It's not just words anymore, it's action." Derek nodded, visibly impressed. "You set the tone," he replied, "and they're following, because they believe in where it's going." Brandon leaned back in his chair, his gaze drifting toward the showroom floor. "It's a long road," he said, "but it's the right one." For him, this wasn't about turning a profit or building a brand. It was about setting a new industry standard where dignity was offered, before assumptions, and service was defined not just by polish but by purpose. Prime Autohaus was still a place of prestige and performance, but now it aspired to be more. With each passing day, Brandon could see the culture reshaping. New hires were onboarded with an emphasis on emotional intelligence, and customers, regardless of how they dressed, spoke, or looked, were treated with care. A business once driven by image was now being redefined by integrity, and for Brandon that was the legacy he truly wanted to build. Not just a luxury dealership, but a living example of what it means to lead with respect, trust, and fairness. As he stood by the glass wall watching the staff interact with customers, he smiled, not out of satisfaction but out of belief. A new beginning had taken root. And this time it was growing in all the right directions. If this story moved, you don't forget to like the video and subscribe to Deep Inside HQ for more powerful stories that reveal the truth behind everyday encounters. Share your thoughts in the comments. Your voice matters. Join us on this journey as we shine a light on hidden biases, challenge assumptions, and celebrate the dignity every person deserves. Let's build a more compassionate world, one story at a time.